Hello, everyone. It's me again. Now, this one's going to be a bit, let's say, light-hearted a bit, all right? We didn't really feel a subject here, but we're fairly light-hearted. So, what we're going to do is like a bit like a podcast, yeah? So, what we're going to do, we're going to take ourselves back 140 years to before 1881. And what we're going to do is going to look at the arguments framed by Westcott and Hort and the accusation case of Textus Receptus and see if they still stand today. So it's interesting in terms of we find scholars have produced theories or arguments that probably never stood the test of time. So I think we're going to have a bit of like a cold case, a forensic cold case, and look at the arguments of Westcott and Hort and the reasons why the Texas was overthrown, and also the impact also on the King James as well. But do those theories still stand? Was it corroborated evidence? It's like a man, they have evidence and they have witnesses, and this man goes to prison, and then they look at the evidence again, and they realise perhaps he was guilty, perhaps he wasn't. I'll let you decide. All right. So let's look at this. Let's have a look at history. So one of the things I got a number of books of guys who are contemporary of Westcott and Hort. And Lightfoot, I got Lightfoot's book, and he was one of the revisers. So he was actually mentioned in Westcott and Hort's letters, and there were close relationship they had. So in there it has the names of the revisers and also the rules. So basically, just quick background is that there was a convocation, Church of England convocation. They decided to have a revision of the King James, and it would be called the English Revised Version. And the interesting thing about the English Revised Version, they had links with an American committee who observed, they didn't actually were involved in the translation, but they observed it was the process. And I believe there's a man, Philip Schaff, some of you may know from his great work, History of the Christian Church. And what Philip Schaff done is that they observed he represented the American committee, which eventually produced the most influential American Standard Version. It's probably the most influential uh, critical, modern critical Bibles that we have today. It's influenced the English Standard Version, the LSB, the NRSV. So it's probably the most influential English version. So basically, they wanted to revise the King James Version, and there was rules given to that committee. And so we're going to go through the rules to set the context. And Westcott and Hort were part of that committee. And I know there's a controversial appointment of George Vance, but we won't go into that. So, so the rules of the revision committee to introduce as few alterations as possible in the text for authorized version consistent with faithfulness. To limit as far as possible the expression of such alterations to the language authorized in earlier English versions. So, a bit background. So the King James would refer to Tyndale, that's very influential, Geneva Bible, Bishop's Bible, Matthew's Bible. So they would actually look at in terms of how they actually translate particular words. So they would have access to other versions as well. Each company to go twice over the portion to be revised. And here's the point: the actual English translation was to be revised. Once provisional, second time, finally, and on principles of voting, as hereinafter is provided. That the text to be adopted be that for which evidence is preponderating. Nice big word there. And that when the text so adopted differs from that from which the authorized version was made, alteration being indicated in the margin. And this is in terms of this very influential when it comes to Scrivener's Textus Receptus. So look at that word, while which the evidence is slightly preponderating. That's quite a big word, so I have to look up what it means. Preponderating. Right. Preponderating means being superior in power, influence, number, or importance compared to others. As a present participle of preponderate, it describes something that outweighs or dominates, such as preponderating influence or a preponderating majority. Okay. Right. So, in terms of the committee, as much few changes as possible. A separate independent computer assisted statistical found 4,165 translatable variants between the TR and 4 critical texts. Westcott and Hort diverges from the TR in 3,618 of those places. Now, emissions represent 46 of those variants. All right, was 1,900. Now, there's different views. I know Jack Mormon did one where he said he found 8,000 differences. So that figure goes up and down, but it's quite a large amount of differences. Rule 5 to 7. To make or retain no change in the text on the second final revision. Each company except 2/3 of those present approve of the same, but on the first revision decide by simple majorities. Yeah. So everything will happen in the first meeting. In every case of proposed alteration that may be given rise to discussion, to defer the voting there until the next meeting, whenever the same shall be required by 1/3 of those present at the meeting, such intended vote to be announced in the notice of the next meeting. To revise the headings of chapters, pages, paragraphs, italics, and punctuation. So it's very sort of superficial change that was expected in terms of the rules. And there was quite some big heavy hitters on that committee. There was FAH Scrivener. Gellis was on the committee, but he wasn't well, so I think he didn't actually have that much input. So to refer rules 8 to 10, to refer on the part of each company when considered desirable to divine scholars and literary men, whether at home or abroad, for their opinions. That's, so for example, people like Constantine by Tischendorf, he was very influential on that committee. So they could have had access to refer to these men. That the work of each company be communicated to the other as it is completed, in order that there may be as little deviation from uniformity in language as possible. That the special or be rules for each company be as follows: to make all corrections in writing previous to the meeting, to place all the corrections due to textual considerations on the left hand margin, and all other corrections on the right hand. So it's textual, it goes on the left hand. To transmit to the chairman in case of being unable to attend the corrections proposed in the portion agreed upon for consideration. So what we find here is there was a man called John Whitfield Sampson. So he was a contemporary, so a prominent American Baptist minister, educator, and prolific author in the 19th century, and the president of Columbia College and pastor of E Street Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. So in the book English Revised Greek Text, this is by Sampson, said this is the reaction. When the revision of the revised version of the English scriptures was proposed, remember it's supposed to be of the translation itself, in England by the Canterbury Convocation, when a minority representation of scholars outside of the established Church of England was admitted to its council. So this is talking about George Vance, who was a Unitarian. And when an American representation was invited to make suggestions, I think it was Philip Schaff. So this was an American committee, and these were the guys who produced that American Standard Version. But they wouldn't have us, they were observers of the process. Few, if any, outside of the original controlling majority had the conception that anything more than a revision of the translation of the text generally received in all branches of the Christian Church, Greek and Oriental, Catholic and Protestant, was proposed. So Bishop Andrews, who was on the committee for the Bishop of St. Andrews, in his late charge to his synod states that to his own impressions of the reviser's work during its progress, the more I saw of the work, the more it appeared to me that we were going beyond the purpose for which, as I understood it, we have been appointed. Going further and citing omissions, that of the doxology in the Lord's Prayer, whose form is used in all the branches of the Christian Church, except the Roman as part of Christ's words. The Bishop of St. Andrews declares, I'm unable to discover any actual consensus of scholars to demand the changes that have been made. Careful students of the history of the New Testament, the preface of the reviser once hinted that the first object was a revision of the received Greek text rather than that of the English translation. And that's what you see with Lightfoot's book. So F.J. Hort, I have to quote this, I have no idea till the last few days of the importance of text, having read so little Greek Testament and dragged on with the villainous Textus Receptus. Think of that vile, that's a bit strong, isn't it? That's a bit strong, Mr. Hort. Of the vile Textus Receptus leaning entirely on late manuscripts. It is a blessing that there are such early ones. That's a bit strong, isn't it? It's very unscholarly statement. Right. So Fenton John Anthony Hall. While various other tasks invited, they never distracted him. This is what his son wrote in his diary. While various other tasks invited, they never distracted him from that which was to provide the chief complete work of his life, the revisions, the revision of the text of the Greek Testament. At one time, he thought of adding it to a translation. So his heart was ready to do a translation, and this he intended to insert many notes of integration and other marks of uncertain of interpretation, as well as of reading. The purpose, of course, was superseded by the work of the Revision Committee formed in 1870. So basically, he was going to do a translation, but he didn't need to because the revision of the authorized version was coming up. And so what they did, they produced the Greek New Testament and privately handed it to some of the people on the committee. And as a consequence, that became the base text for the English Revised Version. So you can see some of the confusion here, that their role, they thought, was doing translation, maybe a bit of change to the text here and there, but it was quite wholesale. So Westcott and Hort had privately worked on a new Greek New Testament since 1853, nearly 2 decades before the ERV officially began. When the revision started, they already possessed a nearly complete, internally consistent Greek text, while other members were largely working from the Textus Receptus or eclectic notes drawn from Tischendorf and Tregelles. So basically, they had the underlying Greek text, and what you'll notice as well, the translation came out before Westcott and Hort's introduction in terms of the principles and the Greek text. So it came out, I think, the same year. It came out after the translation. Right. So one of the things, the Textus Receptus is late and derivative, and this is the argument used mainly against the Textus Receptus. So one of the arguments is that we've had loads of more manuscripts now. They work from old manuscripts, but Harry Sturtz, who was actually the professor for Daniel B. Wallace, he said, look, he demonstrated that there's about 150 distinctly Byzantine readings, but they're actually aligned with the Textus Receptus, are now to be found by early Egyptian papyri. These papyri include B13, B4, B45, 46, 47, 49, 66, 72, 74, and 75. So the discovery of papyri in the 30s and the times actually confirmed readings within the Textus Receptus. So examples, praising and blessing God, and Westcott's decision preferred without the blessing, but this is supported by P75 of all manuscripts. That was a very interesting one, P75, which mainly aligns with Codex Vaticanus. So it's interesting that blessing is found within P75. Matthew 5:44, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who mistreat you. They're rejected the longer, and it's a late Byzantine expansion, the further shorter Alexander reading. So the longer reading supported by P64 and P67, and early versions and fathers. What about John 7, verse 39? The Holy Spirit was not yet given. They treat the fuller phrase as secondary clarification. It's attested in P66. And this also brings out a point that it seems that the early manuscripts seem to omit a lot of variant readings in terms of your Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So the matters must be weighed and not counted. So Westcott and Hort did not apply this method to the manuscripts of the New Testament. Is obvious. Where are the charts which state the majority of late manuscripts are climbed back to diminishing generations of ancestors to the neutral and Western text? Now, this is very important. So, for example, if you do a family tree, like, for example, my brother Paul, he's done a family tree. So he works from my generation, working way all the way back to 1776. You don't normally work forward, you normally work backwards, right? So, but they started from in terms of the Alexandria text, but in fact, there was no explanation. The issue when you start back that far, the question naturally comes in, well, why wasn't it copied? Yeah. Did Codex Vaticanus Sinaiticus die without children? Okay. He says the answer is nowhere. He also talks about Westcott and Hort's genealogical diagrams and relying on imaginary ancestors. So he talks about the genealogical method, But he did actually work from manuscripts, actual manuscripts. And one of the issues why he couldn't do, because a lot of manuscripts are mixed. For example, Codex Alexandrinus isn't in the Gospel, Alexander's in the Pauline epistles. Luke 9, verse 10, right? They withdrew by themselves to a city called Bethsaida. Same as the explanatory matter by combining readings. P75 supports full reading. And this early presence of the so-called conflict reading. John 10:31, conflict reading. All right. And he says it records a mixture of Caesarean and Western and Alexandrian. Let's look. Supported by P66, Gamma and Delta. So it's the discovery of P66 in the middle of the 2nd century. Matthew 27, verse 49. Their claims of conflict reading. P66, P75. So, conflicts with known scribal behavior, further harsher reading. What you find is the harsher and non-harmonious reading. The President's Right study was not simply restricted to Canons. So basically, Andrew Wilson did a study, and it's part of you can download it from academia. And that one of the arguments is that scribes tended to polish up the readings. Yeah. So look what he says. Further harsher, harder, and non-harmonized reading. This present writer, which is Andrew Wilson, was not simply restricted to the canon, the further shorter reading, but also investigated 3 other main transcriptional canons. The second canon examined was further harsher reading. This canon based on the belief that most scribes would tend to polish up or smooth out the text rather than make it more terse, austere, or abrupt. Most presentations of canon regarding further harsh reading is a separate canon to the harder reading. So look at Griesbach and Witzka's statement. This canon therefore deals with text phrases that do not change the meaning of text, but rather affect its style, making it polished and terse. So this is related to, now he's got a book out, just a quick promo to Andrew Wilson. He's got a book out, try and get it, that's Scribal Habits, great stuff. In the study of all single reading, now this is from his paper in the academia, you can download it from academia. In the study of all single reading, substitution, 11 chapters out of 33 people studied, 24 under further short reading were categorized in terms its effect on the text. Right? Let's go into that. So when it came to easy reading, it was a ratio of 76 to 24%. So they didn't make the reading easy, they didn't smooth it out in terms of scribes. Rather than going into details about this, scribes did not make the text easy. This is based on the study of singular readings. So that didn't go. And here's some of the stats. Nonsense reading, 24%. Harder reading, 11%. Harder style, 27%. Neutral, 30%. Easier style, only 8%. Easier sense, 0.4%. So really, that disproves in terms of study of scribal habits, focusing on singular readings. Lucian recension. Now, this one's disproved. Byzantine text is not result for recension count in the 4th century. The theory of Syrian recension must be regarded as abandoned. Nobody holds that. There's no history to that. Westcott, it has to be abandoned. Now, the point being is this, there's no historical evidence for this Lucian recension. This is what I'm saying. When you're doing genealogy, you should work backwards. So my brother done it, work backwards, start from my generation, my dad's, and you'd work your way backwards. The problem is that you can't work from the 4th century, because the first problem you're going to hit, where the other manuscripts, why wasn't it copied? That's your biggest problem. So so he says that, it's commonplace that Catholic Syrian readings or Antonian or Byzantine are necessarily late, is no longer tenable. And it's not the result of a deliberate editorial revision of in the 4th century. That is just to prove this point. If it was the result of an editorial revision, the Greek Orthodox Church would have that same text, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Just like the Vulgate, we have the Vulgate today. All right, Carswatchell, see coherence-based genealogical method. He said the Byzantine text cannot be explained as a result of recession, but only as a long process of transmission and stabilization. The neutral text. Kurt Barbara Land, Codex Vaticanus was their touchstone. They believed, talk about Westcott and Hort, they believed that they discovered it a representative of the neutral text, which came closer to the original text than the three forms recognized as Alexandrian, Byzantine, and Western, especially when it's in agreement with Aleph, like the neutral text. Yeah, actually, there is no such thing as a neutral text, which is actually Vaticanus is talking about of the New Testament, even though P75 was taken so closely to Vaticanus that it could almost be regarded as exemplar in portions of Luke and John. It cannot be called neutral, although it's more than 150 years older. Every manuscript of the New Testament contains a living text. Now, the point being is this, is that now modern scholars have abandoned text types and they focus on variant readings, but that's, we touched that one there. So the text, Hermann Hottke. Now, Hermann Hottke is a serious man. And the reason why I say he's serious, he done a work on the book of Revelation. Now, normally you find certain scholars, their theories and their work doesn't stand the test of time. His one in the book of Revelation stands the test of time. Very accurate, still used today. So you have to take him seriously when he talks about Codex Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. I can't think of anybody who's gone into such a heavy study as he did. He said that Aleph and B, the text of the Westcott and Hort is practically the text of Aleph and B. It's what he said over 100 years ago. And that is still the same case today. The Aleph and B, occasionally over 3,000 real differences between Aleph and B are recorded in the Gospels alone, are inconsistent in themselves and appear in certain places. Carefully as B is written, that's Vaticanus, now and again it presents an ungrammatical reading, which proves on examination to be the fragment of a rival variant. Thus, Matthew 22:26, other instances, yeah. But B presents us with what is evidently a doctored text. This is F.C. Burkhardt, it's another serious scholar. Right, so he says B presents with a doctored text, more of Hermann Hottke. Now, in the following pages, I submit, this is his book, Codex Benalis, Volume 1. I submit a vast number of other instances where B has a doctored text, plainly indubitable doctored. Hort and my side cannot both be right in the essence of this neutral text. I claim merely that it's not neutral and may not be followed as standing. Now, it's almost like seeing the future here. It cannot be neutral and may not be followed unless standing with strong, independent company from the other usual Egyptian supporters. Now, he's actually speaking that with all the discoveries that has come, that hasn't happened apart from P75. And this is Ernest Kevin Cole, and he looked at Mark chapter 1, and he looked at the closest ones, Aleph B, L 33, 892, 2427, and he found that his conclusion was that the text thus reconstructed is not reconstructed but constructed. It's an artificial entity that never existed, and with no architect that can be represented as original. So summing up, the base of Westcott and Hort theory overthrowing the Textus Receptus has been based on principle that history has shown to be demonstrated as unsound based on empirical evidence and recent studies. The manner of introducing the Greek New Testament is to be found, not to be following the rules and procedures for the English revision. Hort organized the entire argument to dispose, this is what Carroll said, dispose the Textus with no empirical facts. So the case is now dismissed against the Textus Receptus. Now, I know a lot of people will not accept that, but the fact of the matter is, if you go back and look at what the arguments were, modern scholars do not accept the standing of Westcott and Hort's views. Most of it's actually been debunked. So, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope, if you've got any comments, feel free, in terms of anything I've said that is not accurate or it's not factual or anything like that, feel free to put in the comments and I will respond. Okay. God bless you, God keep you, and God's face to shine upon you.